I still remember the way my hands trembled on the controls that morning. 23 years as a rescue pilot, and I'd never felt anything like it. The call came in at dawn, a distress beacon from somewhere along the northern ridge coastline, one of the most unforgiving stretches of wilderness I'd ever flown over. Jagged cliffs, freezing water, no roads for 60 miles in any direction. If someone was out there, they wouldn't last long. As I lifted off, the sky was that particular shade of gray that makes you feel completely alone in the world. My co-pilot, Sarah, was quiet beside me. We both knew the statistics. We both knew that sometimes we arrive too late. Then I saw it. 3 letters carved into the rocky shore, so large they seemed to scream from the earth itself. SOS. My heart lurched. Someone was alive down there. Someone was fighting to be seen. I circled lower, scanning for movement, for any sign of the person who'd spent what must have been hours dragging driftwood and stones to spell out those letters. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. There were 2 sets of footprints leading away from the signal. One human. One that definitely wasn't. We landed on a narrow strip of beach, and I radioed for the K9 unit. Marcus arrived within the hour with Luna, his German shepherd, the best tracker in the entire rescue division. I watched as Luna's ears perked up, her nose working the air with an intensity that told me she'd caught something. She took off toward the tree line, and Marcus sprinted after her, shouting for me to follow. What we found changed everything I thought I knew about that rescue. If you want to hear stories like this, real moments that remind us why we never give up, why we keep searching, why every life matters, please subscribe to this channel. Because sometimes the most incredible rescues are the ones that reveal something we never expected. Luna had led us to a small cave, and there, huddled in the darkness, was a young woman. But she wasn't alone. Curled against her chest, barely breathing, was a wolf pup, injured, hypothermic, and clinging to life. She looked up at us with tears streaming down her face and whispered the words that still echo in my mind. I couldn't leave him behind. I just couldn't. I knelt beside Luna that day, watching her work with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Her nose moved in quick, deliberate patterns across the cave floor, and I realized something profound. This dog understood things about survival that I, with all my training and equipment, never could. Marcus placed his hand gently on Luna's back, and I saw the trust between them. It wasn't just training, it was something deeper, something that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't quite name. He whispered to her in that low, calm voice handlers use, and she responded instantly, moving toward a narrow crevice at the back of the cave that we'd completely missed. The young woman we'd found, her name was Emma, tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. 3 days she'd been out here. 3 days with nothing but rainwater and the desperate hope that someone would see her signal. But Luna wasn't focused on Emma anymore. The dog had found something else, and the way her body went rigid told Marcus everything he needed to know. I'll never forget the sound Emma made when Luna emerged from that crevice. It was half sob, half laugh, the sound of someone who'd given up hope suddenly finding it again. Clasped gently in Luna's mouth was a small, waterproof bag. Inside was Emma's insulin. She dropped it during her fall down the cliff face, thought it was lost forever in the rocks and brush. Without it, even if we'd gotten her to the hospital, her chances were diminishing by the hour. Marcus rewarded Luna with her favorite toy, but I could see in his eyes that he was as shaken as I was. He told me later, his voice cracking, that he'd almost called Luna back, almost decided that narrow space was too dangerous, too unstable. But he'd trusted her instinct over his own fear, and that trust had saved a life. The wolf pup Emma had been protecting stirred weakly in her arms, and Luna approached slowly, sniffing with gentle curiosity. There was no aggression, no territorial response, just one creature recognizing another's struggle to survive. Emma's hands shook as she administered her insulin, and she looked at Luna with such raw gratitude that I had to turn away. On the flight back, with Emma stable and the pup secured in a makeshift carrier, I watched Marcus and Luna through the cabin window. His hand rested on her head, and she leaned into him with complete trust. 23 years I'd been doing this job, and I'd always focused on the human element of rescue: the pilots, the paramedics, the coordinators. But that day taught me something I should have known all along. Sometimes the difference between life and death isn't technology, or training, or even courage. Sometimes it's the wet nose of a dog who refuses to give up, and the handler who trusts that nose more than his own doubts. Luna found what we couldn't see, sensed what we couldn't feel, and bridged the gap between lost and found, with nothing but instinct and an unbreakable bond with the man who believed in her. Emma recovered fully. The wolf pup was rehabilitated and eventually released back into the wild. But what stayed with me, what haunts me in the best possible way, is the memory of Luna's eyes in that cave. Dark and knowing, as if she understood exactly what was at stake and refused to let any of us fail. The first thing they teach you in survival training is that panic kills faster than cold or hunger ever will. But I learned the real truth about survival signals on a mountainside in Colorado, when I was the one who needed rescuing. I was 24, arrogant, and convinced that my weekend hiking experience made me invincible. The trail was supposed to be moderate, 6 hours up, 4 hours down. I told exactly no one where I was going. That mistake almost cost me everything. The fall happened so fast I didn't even have time to scream. One moment I was reaching for a handhold. The next I was tumbling down a ravine, my backpack tearing open, supplies scattering across rocks I couldn't see. When I finally stopped rolling, my right leg was screaming in pain, and my phone, my stupid, useless phone, was somewhere above me, probably shattered into pieces. The silence that followed was the loneliest sound I've ever heard. No wind, no birds, just my own ragged breathing and the dawning realization that I'd broken the cardinal rule of wilderness survival. Nobody knew I was here. Nobody was coming. I spent that first hour crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. The pain in my leg was unbearable, but the fear was worse. The sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon, and I knew that when darkness came to these mountains, the temperature would drop below freezing. I had no shelter, no sleeping bag, it had tumbled further down the ravine, and no way to call for help. That's when I remembered my grandfather's voice. He'd been a Marine, served in Vietnam, and he used to tell me stories about survival that I'd half listened to as a kid. 3 priorities, he'd say: signal, shelter, water. Always in that order. Because you can survive days without water, weeks without food. But if nobody knows you're missing, none of that matters. I looked around with new eyes. The ravine had deposited me in a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by dense pine forest. Above me, through a gap in the trees, I could see a sliver of sky. That gap became my lifeline, my hope, my entire focus. With my good leg, I dragged myself across the clearing, biting down on my jacket sleeve to keep from screaming. I gathered every light-colored rock I could reach: limestone, quartz, anything that would contrast against the dark earth, and pine needles. My hands were bleeding by the time I'd collected enough, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. SOS. 3 letters. Universal distress signal. I'd seen it in movies, read about it in books, never imagined I'd be spelling it out with my own trembling hands, praying that someone, somewhere, would fly overhead and look down at exactly the right moment. Each letter had to be at least 10 feet tall. I remembered that from somewhere. Some half-forgotten article or documentary. Rescuers in aircraft need to see it from altitude, need it to be unmistakable. I made the letters as large as my strength would allow, dragging rocks into position, then reinforcing them with branches stripped of their needles to create even more contrast. It took me 3 hours. 3 hours of agony, of stopping to breathe through waves of pain, of wondering if I was wasting my time, if anyone would ever see it. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if they hadn't meant the coming cold. I didn't have materials for a fire. My matches were gone, scattered with everything else. So I did the only other thing I could think of. I took off my bright red jacket, the one my sister had given me for my birthday, and I tied it to the tallest branch I could reach at the edge of my SOS. In daylight, that splash of color would be visible for miles. That night was the longest of my life. I shivered so violently I thought my teeth would crack. I talked to my grandfather, to my sister, to God, anyone who might be listening. I promised I'd never be this stupid again. I promised I'd tell people I loved them more often. I promised I'd take survival seriously if I just got one more chance. The helicopter found me at 11 the next morning. The pilot told me later that he'd almost missed it. He'd been scanning a different grid section when the sun hit my red jacket at just the right angle. He circled back, saw the SOS, and radioed for immediate extraction. When they lifted me out of that ravine, I looked down at those 3 letters I'd built with bleeding hands and desperate hope. They looked so small from the air, so fragile. But they'd been enough. They'd been everything. I carry a personal locator beacon now. I tell everyone where I'm going. I've taken proper survival courses, but I also carry rocks in my pack, smooth white stones that I never hike without. Because I learned that sometimes the simplest signals are the ones that save your life, and the most important survival skill isn't knowing how to build a fire or purify water. It's knowing how to say clearly and unmistakably, "I'm here. I'm alive. Please don't let me disappear." The body was supposed to be alone. That's what the hikers reported. A single person, unresponsive, lying near the old mining trail outside Crescent Falls. Standard recovery operation. We'd done hundreds of them. You go in, you document, you bring them home to their families. It's heartbreaking work, but it's clean. Straightforward. Nothing about that day turned out to be straightforward. I was the lead paramedic on scene, arriving with Sheriff Dawson and 2 deputies just after sunrise. The coordinates led us to a narrow clearing where the forest opened up like cupped hands. And there he was, an elderly man, maybe 70, lying peacefully on his back as if he'd simply decided to take a nap under the morning sky. Dawson knelt beside him, checking for vitals we all knew wouldn't be there. The man's skin was cold, his body stiff. He'd been gone for hours, maybe since the previous evening. I was reaching for my documentation kit when I noticed something that made me pause. His hands were folded across his chest, fingers interlaced perfectly. Too perfectly. People don't die like that naturally. The body doesn't arrange itself with such care. Someone had been here. Someone had stayed with him. I looked at Dawson, and I could see he'd noticed it too. His jaw tightened the way it does when a simple call becomes complicated. We started searching the perimeter, calling out, checking behind trees and rock formations. Nothing. No tracks, no signs of anyone else. Just this man, positioned with such tenderness It made my throat ache. Then my boot caught on something half buried in the pine needles. A small leather journal, worn soft with age and use. I picked it up carefully, and when I opened it, loose photographs spilled out like autumn leaves. A young woman with dark hair and a bright smile. The same woman, older, holding a baby. The woman again, gray-haired now, standing beside the man we'd found. The last entry in the journal was dated 2 days prior. The handwriting was shaky but determined. Going to our place, the spot where I proposed, where we scattered her ashes. It's time to go home to Margaret. If someone finds this, please know I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I want to be. My hands were trembling as I showed it to Dawson. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice, a deliberate, peaceful goodbye. But the positioned hands, that detail gnawed at me. I looked around the clearing again, more carefully this time. That's when I saw the dog. She was maybe 50 yards away, barely visible against the brown and gray of the forest floor. An old golden retriever, her muzzle white with age, lying beneath a pine tree and watching us with dark, knowing eyes. She didn't bark, didn't approach, just watched. I moved toward her slowly, speaking in soft tones, and she didn't run. Up close, I could see how thin she was, how her ribs pressed against her coat. Around her neck was a faded collar with a tag that read Maggie and an address in town. The man's dog, his companion. She'd followed him out here. The pieces came together in my mind like a puzzle I didn't want to complete. The man had come here to die, to this place that held his most precious memory. And Maggie had stayed with him. She'd been there when he took his last breath. She'd arranged his hands with her nose and paws in some instinctive act of devotion that I couldn't fully understand, but felt in the deepest part of my chest. How long had she sat beside him? How many hours had she kept vigil before finally moving away? Before hunger and exhaustion forced her to seek shelter under that tree? And still, she hadn't left. She'd stayed within sight of him, guarding him even in death. I sat down beside Maggie, and she crawled into my lap despite her size, despite her age. She was trembling, exhausted, probably dehydrated. I held her while Dawson made the calls we needed to make, and I felt her heart beating against mine. Steady, loyal, unwilling to abandon the person she loved even when there was nothing left to guard. We learned later that the man's name was Robert Chen. He'd lost his wife Margaret 3 years earlier to cancer. No children, no close family, just Maggie, the dog Margaret had rescued from a shelter 6 months before she died. Their last gift to each other. The funeral home said they'd never seen anything like it. When we brought Robert's body in, Maggie wouldn't leave his side. She lay beside the gurney, her head on her paws, and nothing we did could coax her away. She stayed there for hours until the funeral director, a kind woman named Helen, finally just covered them both with a blanket and let Maggie keep her vigil. I adopted Maggie 3 days later. I told myself it was temporary, just until we found her the right home, but we both knew I was lying. She'd shown me something I needed to see, that love doesn't end when the heart stops beating, that devotion means staying when staying is all you have left to give. She's sleeping beside me now as I write this, her gray muzzle resting on my foot. She's gained weight, gotten stronger, but sometimes I catch her staring out the window with that same watchful expression she had in the forest, like she's still keeping vigil, still guarding someone only she can see. We went back to that clearing once, Maggie and me. She walked straight to the spot where Robert had laid, and she sat down in the exact same position I'd found her in. She stayed there for 10 minutes, not moving, barely breathing. Then she stood up, licked my hand once, and turned toward the trail home. I used to think rescue operations were about the living, about saving the people who still had time. But Maggie taught me different. Sometimes, the most important discovery isn't what we find. It's understanding what was never lost in the first place. Robert wasn't alone when he died. He had love beside him until the very end. And in a world full of tragedy and unexpected endings, maybe that's the secret we all need to uncover. That true devotion doesn't ask for anything in return, except the chance to stay, to be present, to say without words, "You matter. You're not forgotten. You're not alone. The ocean doesn't care about your plans." That's what my father told me before my first solo kayaking trip, and I nodded like I understood. But you don't really understand, not in your bones, not where it counts, until the ocean decides to teach you itself. I'd been paddling the Pacific coastline for 3 days, camping on small beaches, living out some fantasy of self-discovery and adventure that probably looked better on my Instagram than it felt in reality. The weather had been perfect. Calm seas, clear skies, the kind of conditions that make you forget the ocean has moods, that it can turn on you faster than you can breathe. The storm came from nowhere. One moment I was rounding a rocky point, admiring the way the afternoon light turned the water gold. The next moment, the wind hit like a physical blow, and a wave I never saw coming rolled my kayak like it was a child's toy. The water was so cold, it knocked the air from my lungs. 48 degrees, I learned later. Cold enough to kill you in less than an hour, even if you don't drown first. I surfaced, gasping, reaching for my kayak, but another wave separated us. I watched it tumble away, carrying everything I had. My tent, my food, my radio, my phone in its supposedly waterproof case. I swam. God, how I swam. The current was pulling me parallel to the shore, away from any beach I recognized, toward a stretch of coastline I'd seen from the water, but never examined closely. Jagged rocks, steep cliffs, no obvious place to land. My arms felt like lead, and my legs were already going numb from the cold. I don't remember pulling myself onto the rocks. I have flashes, my hands scraping against barnacles, the taste of blood and salt water, the impossible weight of my own body. When I finally collapsed on a narrow strip of stones wedged between the cliff face and the churning ocean, I was shaking so violently I couldn't stand. The shore was maybe 15 feet wide at its widest point. Behind me, a granite cliff rose straight up, at least 60 feet of sheer rock face, slick with spray, and offering nothing that looked like a handhold. In front of me, waves crashed with a violence that made my stomach turn, and stretching in both directions, north and south as far as I could see, the same impossible terrain. Rocks, cliffs, angry water. No beaches, no access points, no way out. I'd survived the ocean. Now I had to survive the shore. The first night almost killed me. I had no dry clothes, no shelter, no way to make fire. The wind came screaming off the water, and the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath in clouds. I wedged myself into a small depression in the cliff face, trying to escape the wind, and I wrapped my arms around my knees and thought about all the ways I was going to die. Hypothermia would come first. I knew the signs from my rescue certification course: the shivering, the confusion, the overwhelming urge to sleep. I slapped my face, dug my fingernails into my palms, did anything to stay awake. Because I knew if I fell asleep, I wouldn't wake up. Sunrise came like a gift I didn't deserve. I was still alive, still conscious. My body had somehow generated enough heat to survive the night, though my fingers were white and numb, and my lips were cracked and bleeding from the salt. In daylight, I could see my prison more clearly. The tide was rising. I could tell by the way waves were reaching higher up the rocks, claiming inches of my already tiny refuge. At high tide, I realized with dawning horror, there might not be any dry ground at all. This entire strip of shore could be underwater. I spent that day climbing. My fingers found cracks in the cliff face, tiny ledges barely wide enough for my toes. I made it maybe 8 feet up before my numb hands betrayed me, and I fell, landing hard on the rocks below. Something in my shoulder made a sound I felt more than heard, and the pain that followed was so intense I vomited seawater I didn't know I'd swallowed. The tide came in. I watched it creep closer, each wave reaching a little farther, soaking my shoes, then my ankles. I moved to the highest point I could find, a boulder wedged against the cliff, and I stood on top of it as the water rose around me. At its peak, I had maybe 3 feet of rock above the waterline, 3 feet between me and drowning. When the tide finally retreated, I collapsed. My shoulder was screaming, my hands were shredded, and I hadn't had fresh water in over 24 hours. The sun had burned my face and neck, and my lips were so swollen I could barely open my mouth. That's when I found the cave. It was hidden behind an outcropping I'd been using as a windbreak, invisible unless you were standing at exactly the right angle. Just a narrow opening, maybe 3 feet tall, leading back into darkness. I crawled inside on my hands and knees, my injured shoulder protesting every movement. The cave was shallow, only about 10 feet deep, but it was dry, protected from the wind. And in the back, where the rock curved upward, moisture had collected in a small depression. Fresh water, rain runoff that had seeped through the cliff and pooled in this miraculous pocket of stone. I cried as I drank, not graceful tears, ugly, grateful, desperate sobbing that echoed off the cave walls. I drank until my stomach hurt. And then I lay down on the cold stone and slept for the first time in 2 days. I survived 4 more days on that shore. 4 days of drinking cave water and eating mussels I scraped off the rocks and kelp I found washed up at the tide line. 4 days of watching the horizon for boats that never came close enough to see me. 4 days of understanding, really understanding, that I might die here. That this narrow strip of rock and water might be the last thing I ever saw. On the 6th day, I heard the helicopter. I scrambled out of the cave, screaming, waving my arms, but it was too far away. It was scanning the water, looking for my kayak, for my body floating in the waves. Not for someone stranded on a shore so remote and inaccessible that nobody would think to look there. That's when I started building the signal. I used everything I had: white stones from the cave, pieces of driftwood, strips of kelp arranged to create contrast. SOS. The letters were crude, smaller than I wanted, but they were all I could manage with one functional arm and hands that could barely grip. The helicopter came back the next morning. I was standing on my boulder, my red thermal shirt, the only bright thing I had, tied to a piece of driftwood and waving over my head like a flag. I saw the moment they spotted me, the way the helicopter banked sharply, coming in low, the way it hovered, unable to land on the rocks, but dropping a rescue swimmer who hit the water and swam to me with powerful, purposeful strokes. His name was Derek. He wrapped me in a thermal blanket and told me I was going to be okay, and I believed him because I had to. Because I'd survived 6 days on a shore that had tried everything it could to kill me, and I was done fighting. They told me later I was lucky, that most people don't survive hypothermia exposure on the first night. That dehydration and injury and despair usually win long before day 6. But I don't think it was luck. I think it was stubborn, desperate animal survival. The kind that makes you drink from stone puddles and eat raw mussels and refuse to let the ocean have the last word. I still dream about that shore sometimes. The sound of waves against rocks, the cold that settles into your bones and never quite leaves, the way each day stretched out endless and impossible, and somehow you survived it anyway. My father was right. The ocean doesn't care about your plans. But what he didn't tell me, what I had to learn for myself, is that sometimes you don't need the ocean to care. You just need to be more stubborn than the rocks, more patient than the tide, and willing to drink from whatever small mercies the universe decides to give you. I knew Marcus was different the first time I saw him work with Luna. It was during a training exercise in Montana, back when I was still new to search and rescue coordination. We'd hidden a volunteer in the woods, standard practice, testing the dog's tracking abilities in challenging terrain. Most handlers were tense, focused, barking commands and corrections. But Marcus was quiet, almost still. He knelt beside Luna, his hand resting gently on her shoulders, and he just listened. I didn't understand what he was listening to. Luna wasn't making a sound, but Marcus nodded slightly, stood up, and followed her into the forest, without hesitation. They found the volunteer in 11 minutes, half the time of any other team that day. I asked him about it later, over coffee in the command tent. "What were you listening to back there?" I said. "Luna wasn't doing anything." Marcus looked at me with those steady gray eyes that had seen too much, and he smiled. "She was doing everything. You just have to know how to hear it." That was 8 years ago. I've worked with Marcus and Luna on 43 missions since then. 43 times I've watched their partnership save lives, solve mysteries, find the unfindable. But I didn't really understand what Marcus meant, what he was trying to tell me that first day, until the Riverside incident. The call came in at 2 in the morning. A 7-year-old boy named Ethan had wandered away from a family camping trip in the Cascade foothills. He'd been missing for 6 hours. The temperature was dropping toward freezing, and the terrain was brutal. Dense forest, steep ravines, dozens of places a small child could fall and disappear. I arrived at base camp to find 12 search teams already deployed, helicopters with thermal imaging sweeping the canopy, and Ethan's mother sitting in the back of an ambulance wrapped in a blanket and sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Her husband stood beside her, his face blank with the kind of shock that comes when your worst nightmare stops being hypothetical. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with Luna. The dog was 7 years old then, a German shepherd with dark, intelligent eyes and a gray muzzle that gave away her age. She wasn't the youngest dog on the team anymore, wasn't the fastest. Some of the newer handlers had started questioning whether Marcus should consider retiring her, getting a younger partner. Watching Marcus's face when he heard those whispers was like watching someone hear their child insulted. His jaw would tighten, and he'd turn away without responding. Because, what could he say? That Luna had something the young dogs didn't? That experience and intuition couldn't be measured in speed tests? That the bond between them had been forged over thousands of hours and dozens of lives, and couldn't be replicated with a fresh recruit, no matter how talented? He brought Luna to Ethan's tent, let her smell the boy's sleeping bag, his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Most dogs would have been excited, eager, pulling at the leash. Luna just sat quietly, her nose working the air, processing information I couldn't begin to understand. Then she looked at Marcus. Just looked at him. And something passed between them that made the hair on my arms stand up. Marcus unclipped her lead, touched her head once, gently, like a blessing, and Luna disappeared into the darkness. "Shouldn't you follow her?" I asked. already reaching for my radio to direct teams toward their location. "Not yet," Marcus said quietly. "She's telling me to wait." We stood there for 5 minutes. 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours while Ethan's mother sobbed and the other teams radioed in negative results, and I wondered if Marcus had finally lost it, if the stress of too many missions had broken something essential in him. Then Luna barked. One sharp, distinctive bark that echoed through the forest. And Marcus was moving before the sound faded, running with a speed and certainty that left me scrambling to keep up. We found them in a ravine half a mile from camp. Ethan had fallen maybe 15 feet, landed on a ledge covered in pine needles and moss. He was unconscious, hypothermic, barely breathing, and Luna was lying beside him, pressed against his small body, sharing her warmth. Marcus slid down the ravine without hesitation, his hands already reaching for Ethan, checking vitals, radioing for medical. But I couldn't take my eyes off Luna. She hadn't moved, hadn't left the boy's side even when Marcus arrived. She'd found him and made a decision. Stay with him, keep him warm, protect him until help came. "How did you know?" I asked Marcus later, after Ethan was stable, after his parents had collapsed in grateful tears, after Luna had eaten her favorite treats and fallen asleep in the back of Marcus's truck. "How did you know to wait? How did you know she'd stay with him?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with exhaustion. "She told me he was hurt. Told me she needed to stabilize the situation before I came crashing in. Told me she had it under control." "She didn't say anything," I protested. "Not with words." Marcus looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes that he didn't bother to hide. 8 years we've been partners. 8 years of working together, sleeping in the same room, eating meals side by side. You spend that much time with someone, human or animal, you stop needing words. You read body language, energy, intention, Luna's ears, the way she holds her tail, how she breathes. It all means something. She communicates constantly. I just have to pay attention. He paused, reaching back to touch Luna's sleeping form through the truck window. People think canine handling is about commands and obedience. Like the dog is just a tool you control. But it's not that. It's never been that. Luna isn't my tool. She's my partner. My equal. And in situations like this, she's usually smarter than me. I thought about that word. Partner. Equal. I thought about the way Marcus had knelt beside Luna before the search, listening to silence. I thought about the 5 minutes he'd made us wait while Luna assessed the situation and made her own tactical decision. "Most handlers would have followed immediately," I said. "Most handlers don't trust their dogs enough." Marcus's voice was gentle, not critical. "They think trust means the dog follows their commands. But real trust? Real partnership? That means knowing when to follow the dog's lead instead. Luna's nose is 40 times more sensitive than mine. Her hearing is 4 times better. In the forest, in the dark, tracking a scared child, she's better equipped than I'll ever be. My job isn't to control her. My job is to support her decisions, to be there when she needs me, and to trust that she knows what she's doing." Luna retired 2 years ago. Arthritis in her hips, the vet said. She'd given everything she had to the work, and now it was time to rest. Marcus took a month off, his first real vacation in a decade, and he spent it at home with Luna, teaching her to just be a dog, to play without purpose, to rest without guilt. He has a new partner now, a young Malinois named Atlas, brilliant and eager and incredibly talented. But I see Marcus sometimes, when he thinks nobody's watching, and he's looking at Atlas with this expression of patient sadness, like he's waiting for something, like he's searching for a connection that hasn't formed yet. I asked him about it once, whether Atlas would ever be what Luna was. Different dogs, different partnerships, he said carefully. Atlas is amazing. He'll save a lot of lives. But Luna, he trailed off, shaking his head. What Luna and I had, that takes time, takes shared trauma and shared victories, takes 1,000 small moments of learning each other's language, takes trust that's been tested and proven and tested again. You can't rush that. You can't manufacture it. Do you miss her? It was a stupid question. I knew the answer. Every day. Marcus's voice broke. Every single day. She's at home, sleeping in the sun, living the retirement she earned. And I'm grateful for that. But working without her is like... He searched for the words. It's like trying to write with your non-dominant hand. You can do it. You can still produce results. But something's missing. The natural flow. The instinctive understanding. I visited Marcus at his home last month. Luna is 9 years old now, her muzzle completely white, her movements slow and careful. But when I walked in, she came to greet me, her tail wagging, her eyes still bright with intelligence and recognition. Marcus was in the kitchen, and I watched him through the doorway. He wasn't doing anything special, just making coffee, moving around his space. But every few minutes, he'd glance at Luna, just checking, making sure she was comfortable. And Luna would meet his eyes, and something would pass between them. A conversation without words. A confirmation that they were both still there, still connected, still partners even without the work to bind them. That's when I finally understood what Marcus had been trying to teach me 8 years ago. The bond between a canine handler and their dog isn't about control or commands or training protocols. It's about two souls learning to speak the same language across species, across difference, across the gap between human and animal. It's about trust so deep you'll wait in the darkness while your partner makes decisions you can't understand. It's about love that doesn't need words because it's written in every glance, every gesture, every moment of choosing to stay. Luna saved 47 lives in her career. 47 people who are alive today because she didn't give up, because she trusted Marcus to trust her. But watching them now, in the quiet of retirement, I think maybe they saved each other. Maybe that's what true partnership means. Not one leading and one following, but two hearts beating in sync. Two minds thinking as one. Two lives completely intertwined in a bond that transcends everything we think we understand about connection. Marcus still visits Luna every day during his lunch break. Still sits on the floor beside her, his hand on her side, just listening. And maybe that's the real secret to high-stakes situations. Maybe it's not about having the best equipment or the most rigorous training. Maybe it's about finding someone, human or animal, who understands you so completely that words become unnecessary, and trust becomes the only language that matters. I never wanted to be a pilot. That's the truth nobody expects when they meet me now, when they see the uniform and the wings, and assume this was always the dream. But I grew up terrified of heights. The kind of kid who couldn't climb a ladder without feeling dizzy, who had nightmares about falling. My brother Daniel was the one who loved flying. He'd build model airplanes in our garage, spend hours watching videos of rescue helicopters and bush pilots navigating impossible terrain. He talked about becoming a search and rescue pilot the way other kids talked about becoming astronauts, with absolute certainty, like the future was already written. He died 3 weeks before his 18th birthday. Hiking accident in the White Mountains. He fell during a storm, and by the time someone found him and called for help, it was too late. The rescue helicopter arrived 40 minutes after the call. The pilot told my parents that if they'd gotten there 20 minutes earlier, Daniel might have lived. 20 minutes. That's the difference between my brother being alive and me standing at his funeral trying to figure out how to keep breathing. I started flight training 6 months later. My hands shook during every lesson. I threw up before my first solo flight. But I kept showing up because, somewhere in the fog of grief, I'd made a promise to a ghost. 20 minutes. I was going to make sure that for someone else's brother, someone else's child, 20 minutes wouldn't be too late. The first time I spotted someone from the air, really spotted them, not during training but during an actual rescue, I was 26 years old and still half convinced I didn't belong in that cockpit. The call came in during a January snowstorm. A hunter hadn't returned from the Adirondacks. His truck was at the trailhead, but he'd been gone for 18 hours in below-zero temperatures. Visibility was terrible. Snow coming down so thick it was like flying through static. Every gust of wind trying to knock us sideways. My co-pilot, a veteran named Chuck, who'd been doing this since before I was born, kept shooting me these sideways glances, like he was waiting for me to panic. "You good?" he asked for the third time. "I'm good," I lied. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. All I could think about was Daniel. About someone else's family waiting by the phone. About 20 minutes being the difference between everything and nothing. Then I saw it. Just a flash of color against the white. Orange, maybe, or red. Something that didn't belong in the monochrome landscape below us. 9 o'clock, I said, banking the helicopter before Chuck could even confirm. "I've got something." It was the hunter's jacket. He'd taken it off. First sign of severe hypothermia, when your brain stops working right and you feel burning hot instead of freezing cold. He'd collapsed maybe 30 yards away, barely visible against the snow. We'd been looking for someone wearing bright orange. We almost missed him entirely. Chuck deployed the rescue team while I held position, fighting the wind, the visibility, the voice in my head that kept saying I wasn't good enough for this. We got him out, rushed him to the hospital. He survived with all his fingers and toes and his life intact. 23 minutes from call to extraction. 3 minutes to spare. I cried in the parking lot after my shift ended. Chuck found me sitting in my truck, still in my flight suit, sobbing like a child. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me until I could breathe again. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your brother would be proud." I've been flying search and rescue for 19 years now. 19 years of scanning forests and mountains and coastlines, looking for the tiny details that mean someone's alive. A reflection off a car windshield. A disruption in the tree canopy. Smoke from a signal fire. An SOS spelled out in rocks or branches or whatever desperate people can find. People think it's about the technology, the infrared cameras, the GPS tracking, the sophisticated radar systems. And yes, those tools matter, but they're not what saves lives. What saves lives is the human eye trained to spot patterns, to notice disruption, to see what doesn't belong. I teach new pilots now, and I tell them the same thing every time. Your job is to look at everything and see nothing until you see something. They don't understand at first. They think I'm being cryptic, philosophical. But it's the most practical advice I know. When you're flying search patterns over wilderness, your brain wants to categorize everything as normal. Trees, rocks, snow, water, all expected. All background noise. You have to teach your mind to stay alert for the abnormal, the out of place, the single element that disrupts the pattern. And you have to do it for hours at a time, through fatigue and weather and the hypnotic monotony of endless terrain. Last summer, we were searching for a missing kayaker off the Oregon coast. Young woman, early 20s, had gone out alone and never came back. We'd been searching for 2 days. The ocean had been rough, and nobody was saying it out loud, but we were all starting to think we were looking for a body. I was on my third pass over a stretch of rocky coastline when I saw the birds. Gulls circling in a pattern that didn't make sense. Usually they scatter evenly along the shore, looking for food in the tidal pools. But these were concentrated in one spot, diving and circling over the same small area. "Something's attracting those birds," I said to my co-pilot, a sharp young woman named Reese. "Take us lower." She gave me a skeptical look but followed my lead. As we descended, I could see what the birds were interested in. A small patch of color wedged between 2 rocks. Red fabric. A piece of the kayaker's life vest. We found her in a cave 20 yards from where her vest had washed up. She'd been surviving on rainwater and kelp, had broken her ankle in 3 places, was severely dehydrated and hypothermic. But she was alive. 48 hours in conditions that should have killed her. And she was alive. The news called me a hero. Said I had eagle eyes, supernatural spotting abilities. But the truth is simpler and stranger than that. I was looking at birds and thinking about patterns. I was noticing that something was slightly wrong with the picture, and I was trained enough, paranoid enough, to investigate why. That's what aviation does for modern search and rescue. It gives us altitude, perspective, the ability to cover vast distances quickly. But more than that, it gives us a vantage point that transforms the search. What looks impossible from the ground, dense forest, endless coastline, mountain ranges that go on forever, becomes a puzzle from the air. A puzzle where you're looking for the one piece that doesn't quite fit. I've spotted survivors by seeing their shadows when I couldn't see them. I've found crashed planes by noticing trees that had been broken in a straight line, instead of the random patterns of natural damage. I've located lost hikers by seeing trails that ended abruptly, suggesting someone had gone off path. Every rescue is the same and completely different. The same desperate search, the same racing against time, but different terrain, different weather, different reasons someone needs to be found. And every single time, I think about Daniel, about the pilot who got to him too late, about the 20 minutes that meant everything. There's a moment in every successful rescue that I've never been able to adequately describe. It's when you spot them, when you've been searching for hours or days, when hope is starting to fade, when you're beginning to doubt, and suddenly, there they are, a person, alive, waving or signaling or just existing in a place where they shouldn't be able to exist anymore. Your heart doesn't soar in that moment. That's what people expect, what makes for good television. But the reality is quieter, more profound. Your heart settles, like a door closing, like an answer to a question you've been asking since you were 17 years old, standing at your brother's funeral, wondering if any of this means anything. It means this. It means being the difference between someone making it home and someone not. It means being the eyes in the sky, the coordinates radioed to ground teams, the voice on the radio saying, "I've got them, I see them, we're bringing them home." I'm 53 years old now. My eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be. I need reading glasses, and sometimes the glare off the water bothers me more than it should. There are younger pilots with better vision, faster reflexes, more years ahead of them. But I'm not done yet. Because every time I fly, every time I scan terrain looking for the impossible, I'm keeping a promise to a ghost. I'm being the pilot who arrives in time. I'm making sure that for someone's brother, someone's daughter, someone's mother, 20 minutes isn't too late. Last week, I flew my 500th successful rescue mission. 500 people who are alive today, because someone in a helicopter happened to look in the right direction at the right moment and saw something that didn't belong. 500 families who didn't have to plan funerals. 500 lives that continued instead of ended. The team threw me a party. There was a cake, speeches, people telling stories about rescues I barely remember because there have been so many. My wife was there, proud and terrified the way she's been for 19 years. My daughter, named Danielle after the uncle she never met, told everyone that her dad was a hero. But standing there, surrounded by people celebrating what I've done, all I could think about was what I couldn't do. About one hiker in the White Mountains, about a storm and a fall, and a rescue helicopter that arrived 20 minutes too late. About a boy who wanted to fly and never got the chance. This job isn't about being a hero. It's about paying attention when attention matters most. It's about refusing to accept that someone being lost means they can't be found. It's about believing that altitude and perspective and a trained eye can transform tragedy into survival. And sometimes, on the quiet flights between rescues, when I'm alone in the cockpit with just the sound of rotors and my own thoughts, I imagine Daniel up there with me, looking down at the same terrain, seeing the same patterns. And I imagine him seeing all the people we've found, all the lives we've saved, all the families who didn't have to learn what ours learned. I imagine him proud. I imagine him saying it was worth it. The fear, the training, the 19 years of fighting my own terror to do this work. I imagine him knowing that his death, senseless and terrible as it was, led to something that mattered. 500 lives. 500 times I've been the pilot who arrived in time. It doesn't bring Daniel back. It doesn't erase the 20 minutes that meant everything. But it's something. In a world full of things we can't control, can't fix, can't undo, it's something. And tomorrow, I'll go back up. I'll scan forests and mountains and coastlines, looking for the tiny disruptions that mean someone needs help. I'll notice the wrong color, the broken pattern, the shadow that shouldn't exist. And if I'm lucky, if I'm paying enough attention, I'll be the difference between someone making it home and someone not. That's what aviation gives us. That's what those of us in the sky provide to those lost on the ground. Not certainty, not guarantees, just a fighting chance. Just eyes looking for you when you can't be seen from anywhere else. Just the possibility that someone, somewhere, is refusing to stop searching until you're found. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Plain Manila, no return address, my name written in careful block letters across the front. I almost threw it away. I get a lot of mail at the station. Most of it thank you cards from people we've rescued or families of people we couldn't save. After 12 years as a search and rescue coordinator, I've learned that sometimes the hardest letters to read are the grateful ones. But something made me open it. Maybe the weight of it, heavier than a card should be. Maybe the way my name was written, like whoever addressed it had taken their time, wanted to get it exactly right. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on lined paper, the kind you tear from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written by someone very old or very sick, or trying to write while their hands wouldn't stop trembling. "You saved my daughter's life 3 years ago," it said. "You don't know what else you saved. Please watch this. Please understand what you really found that day." Robert Mitchell. I remembered the name immediately. Sarah Mitchell. She'd been 19, a college student who'd gone hiking alone in the Bitterroot Mountains and gotten lost when a summer storm rolled in faster than anyone predicted. We'd found her after 36 hours, dehydrated and hypothermic, but alive. Standard rescue. Nothing particularly unusual about it, except that she'd managed to survive overnight temperatures that should have killed her. I'd gotten a thank you card from her parents a few weeks after. Nice people, grateful. The kind of letter that makes the job feel worthwhile. That had been 3 years ago. I hadn't thought about Sarah Mitchell in at least 2 years. I plugged the USB drive into my computer. One video file, dated 2 weeks ago. I clicked play. The man on screen was maybe 60, gaunt in a way that spoke of recent weight loss, sitting in what looked like a home office with family photos visible on the wall behind him. His eyes were the thing I noticed most. Exhausted, haunted, but somehow peaceful too. "My name is Robert Mitchell," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands I could see as he adjusted the camera. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead. Pancreatic cancer. They gave me 3 months, and that was 7 weeks ago. But I needed to make this video while I still could. Needed you to understand something that you don't know. Something Sarah doesn't even fully know." He paused, looking directly into the camera with an intensity that made me lean closer to the screen. "3 years ago, you rescued my daughter from the Bitterroot Mountains. You probably remember it as a successful operation. Lost hiker, found alive, everyone goes home happy. But what you don't know, what I've never told anyone except my wife, is that the morning Sarah went missing, I had made a decision. I had written the note. I had the pills counted out on my desk. I was going to kill myself that afternoon." My breath caught. The office around me seemed to shrink. "I'd been depressed for 2 years," Robert continued. "Lost my job, lost my sense of purpose. My wife was worried, my kids were worried, but I couldn't see past the darkness. Couldn't imagine waking up one more day feeling the way I felt. So I made a plan. Tuesday afternoon, when everyone would be at work or school. Clean, simple, final." He smiled then, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. Then the phone rang. Sarah was missing, and suddenly I had to function. Had to drive to the trailhead, had to coordinate with your team, had to be present and focused because my daughter needed me. The pills stayed on the desk. The note stayed in the drawer. Because I had a reason to stay alive, at least until we found her. Robert's eyes were wet now, but he didn't wipe them. Those 36 hours were the longest of my life. But somewhere in that waiting, in that desperate hoping, something shifted. I remembered what it felt like to need something beyond myself, to have a purpose bigger than my own pain. And when you called to say you'd found her, when I heard that she was alive—" His voice broke. He took a moment, composing himself. "When I knew she was alive, I realized I wanted to be alive too. I wanted to see her face, wanted to hold her, wanted to be there for whatever came next. The depression didn't magically disappear. I got help after that, therapy and medication, and the hard work of healing. But that moment, hearing that you'd found her, that was when I chose to stay." Robert leaned forward, his eyes locked on the camera. "So yes, you saved my daughter's life. But you also saved mine. And my wife's life, from the grief that would have destroyed her. And my son's life, from growing up without a father. You saved my grandson's life. He was born 8 months ago, and I got to hold him, got to see Sarah become a mother. You saved all of that, and you didn't even know it." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was gentle. "I'm telling you this now, because I want you to understand something. Every rescue you perform, every life you save, it ripples outward in ways you can't see. You don't just save one person. You save everyone who loves them, everyone who needs them, everyone whose life would be smaller and darker without them in it. Robert smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. I got 3 extra years. 3 years I wasn't supposed to have, that I wouldn't have had if you hadn't found Sarah that day. I got to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. I got to meet my grandson. I got to tell my wife every single day that I love her. I got to become someone my depression told me I could never be. Someone who wanted to live. He looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. The cancer is winning now. I'm not afraid anymore. I've had my extra time, and it was beautiful. But I needed you to know that your work matters in ways you'll never fully understand. That the person you pull out of the wilderness carries with them all the lives they'll touch, all the love they'll give, all the moments they'll create. You don't just save individuals, you save futures. The video ended. Robert Mitchell's face froze on my screen, that peaceful smile, those knowing eyes. I sat in my office for a long time, not moving. Around me, the station continued its normal rhythm. Radios crackling, voices in the hallway, phones ringing. But I felt separated from it all, wrapped in the weight of what I'd just learned. We have a board in the station break room where we track our rescues. Names, dates, locations. 743 successful operations in the 12 years since we opened this facility. 743 people found alive. I'd always thought of them as individuals. 743 separate victories. 743 people who went home instead of dying in the wilderness. But Robert Mitchell had just reframed everything. Each of those 743 people had parents, siblings, friends, children. Each of them was someone's reason to keep going. Each of them was connected to dozens or hundreds of other lives that would have been irrevocably changed by their loss. How many Robert Mitchells had we accidentally saved? How many people had we kept alive who were someone else's lifeline, someone else's reason to stay? How many weddings had happened? How many children had been born? How many ordinary, beautiful moments had existed because we'd found someone in time? I pulled up Sarah Mitchell's file. The report was clinical, factual. Subject located at 14:23 hours on day 2 of search operation. Mild hypothermia, moderate dehydration, sprained ankle, transported to St. Mary's Hospital, released the following day. Case closed. Nothing in that report about her father. Nothing about pills on a desk or a note in a drawer. Nothing about a man who chose life because his daughter had been found. Nothing about the grandson who would be born 2 years later, or the wedding that would happen, or the 3 extra years of mornings and conversations and ordinary moments that we'd made possible without knowing it. I started going through other files, random selections, rescues from years ago, a 16-year-old boy who'd gotten separated from his hiking group, a woman in her 40s who'd crashed her car on a remote mountain road, an elderly man with dementia who'd wandered away from his care facility. For each one, I tried to imagine the hidden story. Who had needed them to survive? What future had we saved without realizing it? What ripples had spread out from that moment of finding them, calling in their location, bringing them home? My phone rang. Current rescue operation. A rock climber injured on a cliff face, about 40 miles north. Stable, but unable to self-rescue. Helicopter en route. ETA 30 minutes. I coordinated the operation the way I always do. Calm, efficient, focused on the immediate problem. But something had shifted. As I talked to the pilot, as I relayed information to the ground team, as I tracked the rescue in real time, I found myself thinking about all the people I'd never meet. The climber's partner waiting at home, his parents somewhere, maybe not even knowing yet that their son was in danger. Friends, colleagues, everyone whose life would be touched by whether or not we succeeded in the next hour. We got him out. Broken leg, some contusions, but alive. I filed the report and moved on to the next call, the next crisis, the next person who needed finding. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Robert Mitchell, about his peaceful smile in that video, about the fact that he was probably dead by now. He'd lived his extra time, created his extra moments, and then let go. But he'd taken the time, in his final weeks, to make sure I understood what his rescue had really meant. I started asking questions after that. Not officially, not in any systematic way, but when we'd get thank you cards or letters, I'd sometimes call the number included, if there was one. I'd say I was following up, checking on their recovery. And then I'd listen. I learned about the woman we'd pulled from a collapsed mine shaft who went on to start a nonprofit for mine safety. About the teenager we'd found after 3 days in the wilderness, who became a wilderness guide, teaching others how to survive. About the man we'd rescued from a flash flood who proposed to his girlfriend that same night, realizing he couldn't waste another moment. But I also learned about the quieter ripples. The father who made it home in time for his daughter's piano recital. The grandmother who got to meet her first great-grandchild. The teacher who returned to her classroom and inspired 30 students who would never know how close they'd come to losing her. Every rescue saves more than one life. That's what Robert Mitchell taught me. Every person we find is a stone dropped in a pond, and the ripples spread farther than we can see. I think about that now every time we launch a search operation, when I'm coordinating teams in the middle of the night, when I'm staring at maps trying to predict where someone might have gone, when I'm listening to radio chatter and hoping for good news. I think about all the lives hanging in the balance, not just the person we're searching for, but everyone connected to them, everyone who needs them, everyone whose future depends on us finding them in time. Robert Mitchell died 3 weeks after he mailed me that video. I went to his funeral. Sarah was there with her husband and her baby, surrounded by family and friends, dozens of people whose lives had been touched by a man who almost wasn't there to touch them. I didn't introduce myself, didn't explain why I was there. I just sat in the back and watched as person after person stood up to talk about Robert, about his kindness, his humor, his love for his family, about the way he'd fought depression and won, about the 3 years he'd been given and how he'd filled them with meaning. And I thought, we gave him those 3 years. We didn't know it. We were just doing our job, finding a lost hiker, checking a name off a list. But we gave him 3 years to be a father, a husband, a grandfather, 3 years to heal, to grow, to become someone who wanted to live. 3 years of ripples spreading outward in ways we'll never fully comprehend. That's the secret they don't tell you about rescue work. You think you're saving individuals, one person at a time. But you're actually saving entire universes, all the moments and connections and futures that exist because one person made it home. You're saving the wedding that hasn't happened yet, the child who hasn't been born, the ordinary Tuesday morning coffee between father and daughter that seems meaningless until you realize how easily it might not have existed at all. 743 rescues. But how many lives? How many hidden stories like Robert Mitchell's? How many futures did we save without knowing, without understanding the full weight of what we were really doing? I'll never know the answer. None of us will. That's the nature of ripples. They spread beyond where we can see them, touching shores we'll never reach. but knowing they exist, knowing that every person we find carries with them an entire world of connections and consequences and futures, it changes how you see the work. It makes every search matter more. Every coordinate checked, every grid pattern flown, every hour spent staring at terrain, wondering where someone might be, it all carries more weight when you understand what you're really searching for. Not just a person, but all the lives that person will touch. Not just survival, but futures. Robert Mitchell wanted me to understand that. In his final weeks, facing his own mortality, he wanted me to know that the work matters, that it ripples, that saving one life means saving countless others in ways we'll never see, but that are no less real for being hidden. I keep his video on my computer. Sometimes, on the hard days, when we don't find someone in time, when we're too late, when I have to make the call to a family with news they don't want to hear, I watch it again. I hear Robert's voice telling me about extra years and hidden saves and ripples we can't see. And then I go back to work. Because somewhere out there, someone is lost. And connected to them is an entire universe of people who need them found. People who don't even know yet that their lives hang in the balance. People who will go on to create more ripples, touch more lives, save more futures, in ways both big and small. That's what we really do in search and rescue. We don't just find lost people. We save universes. We preserve futures. We keep the ripples going. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, someone like Robert Mitchell takes the time to tell us what we really found that day. The call came through dispatch at 4 in the morning, which is never a good sign. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours after a double shift, and my body felt like it was made of lead. But you answer the phone anyway. You always answer the phone. "We've got a situation," dispatch said, and something in her voice made me sit up straight. "Family of 4, camping near Echo Lake. 9-year-old boy went to use the bathroom around midnight and never came back. Parents started searching, found his flashlight by the lake. No sign of the kid. I was already pulling on my boots. Water search? Negative. Dive team checked the accessible areas. No evidence he went in the water. But here's where it gets weird. K9 unit picked up his trail heading into the forest, then lost it completely about half a mile in. Like he just vanished. Vanished." I repeated the word, feeling the familiar dread settle into my stomach. In 12 years of search and rescue, I'd learned that when someone just vanishes, there's always a reason. And the reason is usually something nobody wants to find. I arrived at the command post an hour later. The family was there, mother and father holding on to each other like they might collapse if they let go. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, asleep in the back of their SUV wrapped in a blanket. The father's eyes were red from crying. The mother's were empty, like she'd gone somewhere inside herself where the worst hadn't happened yet. "His name is Tyler," the father said, his voice breaking on the name. "He's 9. He's afraid of the dark. He wouldn't have gone far from the tent. He wouldn't have. Something's wrong. I've heard that 1,000 times. Something's wrong." And the terrible thing about search and rescue is that sometimes the families are right, and what's wrong is worse than they can imagine. The K9 handler, a woman named Patricia with 20 years of experience, showed me where the trail had ended. Middle of the forest, nothing remarkable about the location. No cliffs, no water, no obvious hazards. "It doesn't make sense," she said, frustration clear in her voice. "Jasper's one of the best tracking dogs in the state. He had the scent, was following it clearly. And then," she snapped her fingers, "nothing. Like Tyler was plucked out of existence." I looked at the ground. Leaves, pine needles, the normal forest floor. No signs of struggle. No disturbed earth. No blood. Just a place where a trail ended for no reason. Could he have been picked up? I asked. Someone waiting here. Grabbed him. Patricia's face went pale. We were both thinking the same thing. Predators don't just mean animals in the wilderness. We expanded the search grid, brought in more teams, more dogs, a helicopter with thermal imaging. Hours passed. The sun rose. Tyler's mother stopped crying and just sat very still, staring at nothing. His father walked the same 100-yard stretch of trail over and over, like repetition might change the outcome. I was coordinating with the helicopter pilot when one of the ground team members radioed in. His voice was shaking. You need to see this. North Grid, Sector 7. I don't know what this is. We found him standing at the entrance to what looked like an old mine shaft, the kind that litters the mountains from abandoned mining operations decades ago. The entrance was partially collapsed, covered in brush and easy to miss unless you were looking for it. There's a shoe, he said, pointing. Child's sneaker. Just inside. My heart was hammering as I approached. The sneaker was small, blue with yellow stripes, exactly what Tyler's parents had described him wearing. Tyler? I called into the darkness. No response. We had to widen the entrance to get inside safely. It took 40 minutes that felt like hours. The whole time I was thinking about Tyler. 9 years old, afraid of the dark, trapped in a collapsed mine shaft in the middle of the night. Thinking about what we might find when we finally got through. The mine tunnel went back maybe 50 feet before it opened into a small chamber. And there, huddled in the back corner with a flashlight he must have picked up that had since died, was Tyler. But he wasn't alone. A man was with him. Mid-40s, thin, wild-eyed, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. He had his arm around Tyler protectively, and when our lights hit them, he flinched back like an animal. "Don't hurt him," the man said. His voice was hoarse, panicked. "Don't hurt my son." I felt my blood turn to ice. Tyler was staring at us with huge, terrified eyes. But he wasn't crying. He was very, very still. "My name is David Chen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm with Search and Rescue. Tyler's parents sent us to find him." "His parents are dead," the man said flatly. "Car accident, 5 years ago. I'm all he has left." Tyler's eyes met mine. He shook his head, just barely. A tiny movement that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Tyler's father. This was someone who thought Tyler was someone else entirely. Someone who had found a lost child in the woods and had seen… what? A second chance? A replacement? A delusion made real? I've dealt with dangerous situations before. Armed suspects, domestic violence, people in crisis. But nothing prepared me for the complexity of this moment. A man who genuinely believed he was protecting a child, holding a child who was in real danger, in a collapsed mine shaft where one wrong move could bring the whole thing down on all of us. "What's your name?" I asked the man. "Daniel. Daniel Morrison." He pulled Tyler closer. "This is my son, Sam. We're fine here. We have food, water. We don't need rescue." Behind me, I could hear Patricia radioing for additional support, for a crisis negotiator, for someone who knew how to handle this. But crisis negotiators were 2 hours away, and we were in an unstable mine shaft with a man experiencing a psychotic break. "Daniel," I said gently, "Sam looks scared. Can I check to make sure he's okay?" "He's fine, just startled. He doesn't like strangers." Daniel's eyes were darting around, and I could see him beginning to realize something was wrong. The mine shaft, the rescue equipment, the multiple people. The delusion was cracking. How long have you been here, Daniel? I don't... A few days? I found Sam by the lake. He was all alone. His parents... His voice broke. His parents left him. But I won't. I won't leave him like they did. Tyler, Sam in Daniel's mind, was starting to cry now. Silent tears running down his face, his small body shaking. Daniel, I said, making eye contact and holding it. I can see you love Sam very much. I can see you want to protect him. But right now, this mine isn't safe. The ceiling could collapse. Can we move somewhere safer? All of us together? For a long moment, Daniel didn't respond. His arm was still around Tyler, holding him close. Then something seemed to break in him. His face crumpled. I lost him, he whispered. 5 years ago. Car accident. My wife and my boy. Both gone. And I've been so lost. When I found him by the lake, I thought... He looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and I saw the delusion crack further. He's not Sam, is he? No, I said gently. But his name is Tyler, and his parents are waiting for him. They love him just as much as you loved Sam. Daniel started sobbing. Great, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. And slowly, carefully, he let go of Tyler. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... I just missed him so much. Getting them both out of the mine shaft took another hour. Daniel was cooperative, broken, barely able to walk. Tyler ran to his parents, and they collapsed around him, the three of them holding each other so tightly I had to look away. But that wasn't the end of the story. That was just the rescue. The investigation revealed that Daniel Morrison had been living in the forest for 6 months. His family had reported him missing after he'd disappeared from a psychiatric facility where he'd been treated for severe depression and PTSD following the accident that killed his family. He'd been surviving on his own, constructing an elaborate delusion that he'd found his son and was keeping him safe. The prosecutor wanted to charge him with kidnapping, child endangerment, false imprisonment. But Tyler's parents refused to press charges. They'd met with Daniel in custody, had listened to his story, had seen a man destroyed by grief who had found a child in the woods and genuinely believed he was saving him. He kept Tyler warm, the mother told me weeks later. He shared his food and water. He talked to him, kept him calm. Yes, he was delusional. Yes, Tyler was terrified. But Daniel didn't hurt him. He thought he was protecting him. Daniel was recommitted to psychiatric care instead of prison. The last I heard, he was responding to treatment, slowly rebuilding some kind of life from the wreckage of his loss. But the part of this story that still haunts me, the part I think about late at night when I can't sleep, is more complicated than good guys and bad guys, rescuer and threat. Because in Daniel's mind, he was the rescuer. He was the one who had found an abandoned child and protected him. He was the hero of his own story, driven by love and grief into a delusion that felt more real than reality. And Tyler had been genuinely lost, genuinely in danger, and had been found by someone. Just not someone whose finding him made him safe. That's the thing about rescue operations that no one really talks about. We assume finding means saving. We assume discovery leads to safety. But sometimes what you find is more complicated than the binary of lost and found. Sometimes the person who finds you is themselves so lost that being found by them is its own kind of danger. I've thought a lot about that mine shaft, about Daniel's arm around Tyler, protective and possessive at once, about the look in Tyler's eyes, not quite terror, not quite relief, Just a child who knew something was wrong but didn't know how to articulate what or why. What if we hadn't found them for another day? Another week? Would Tyler have started to believe Daniel's delusion? Would he have become Sam in his own mind, accepting a new reality because the alternative was too confusing, too scary? Or what if Daniel had realized sooner that Tyler wasn't Sam? What would have happened when the delusion shattered completely? When he had to face what he'd really done? There are so many versions of how this could have ended, and in most of them, Tyler doesn't make it home. I saw Tyler's family at a community event last year. Tyler is 12 now, starting to look more like a teenager than a child. He's in therapy, his mother told me. Doing well, mostly. Still afraid of the dark. Still has nightmares sometimes about a man in a mine shaft who called him by the wrong name. But he's okay, she said, and I heard the desperate need to believe it in her voice. He's going to be okay. I wanted to tell her that, of course, he would be. That being found means being saved. That rescue means everything goes back to normal. That survival is the same as healing. But I've been doing this too long to believe those comfortable lies. Tyler survived the mine shaft. He survived Daniel Morrison and the hours of being held by someone who loved a ghost. He survived being found by the wrong person before being found by the right ones. But he'll carry that mine shaft with him forever. The darkness, the confusion, the moment when being found didn't mean being safe. That's the hidden secret in every rescue story, the part that comes after, the psychological aftermath, the ways that survival isn't the same as being whole. We put up search and rescue statistics like they're scorecards. Lives saved, successful operations, people found alive. But we don't track the nightmares that follow. The therapy bills, the relationships strained by trauma, the ways that being lost, really lost, in danger and afraid, changes you permanently. Daniel Morrison taught me that rescue is more complicated than I wanted it to be. That the same impulse that drives people to search, love, devotion, the desperate need to protect, can become twisted by grief and delusion into something dangerous. That sometimes the person who finds you is the one you need to be rescued from. And that the hardest rescues aren't always the ones where we race against time or difficult terrain. Sometimes the hardest rescues are the ones where we have to navigate the complicated landscape of the human mind, where reality and delusion blur, where love and danger become impossible to separate. I still coordinate search and rescue operations. I still send teams into the wilderness looking for lost hikers and missing children. But I'm more careful now about the word found, because finding someone is just the beginning of the story, not the end. And sometimes, like in a mine shaft with a grieving man and a terrified child, finding reveals secrets we didn't know we were looking for. Secrets about loss and love, about the fine line between protection and possession, about the ways that rescue can be complicated and messy, and still, somehow, miraculously, enough. Tyler made it home. That's what matters. But he carried the mine shaft home with him, carried Daniel Morrison's grief and delusion and broken love, carried the understanding that being found doesn't always mean being safe, and that sometimes the secrets we uncover during rescue operations are the ones hidden in the human heart. Broken and desperate and dangerous, and somehow still capable of love, even when that love has nowhere left to go but into delusion. The story that broke the internet last summer started with a single photograph. A rescue pilot hovering over a remote shoreline, a dog sitting alert beside scattered rocks that spelled SOS, and a young woman being lifted into a helicopter. The headline read, "Miracle Rescue, Lost hiker and her loyal dog survive 5 days in wilderness. Within hours, it had 10 million views. By the next day, every major news outlet was running the story. The woman's face was everywhere. Magazines, talk shows, social media trending topics. People called it the feel-good story of the year. I was the coordinator on that rescue. And I'm here to tell you that almost everything the public believes about it is wrong. Her name was Jennifer Hayes, 26 years old, experienced hiker. The dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, wasn't hers. That detail got lost in the viral frenzy, but it mattered more than anyone knew. We found them on day 5 of the search. Jennifer had fractured her ankle, couldn't walk, had been surviving on stream water and whatever Buddy brought her, mostly small animals he'd hunted. The SOS was impressive, clearly visible from the air. Buddy sat beside it like a sentinel, and that image, that perfect, heartbreaking image, became the symbol of loyalty and survival. The media loved it. Dog saves owner's life. Man's best friend proves why we love them. Interview requests poured in. A book deal. A movie offer. Jennifer and Buddy became inseparable in the public imagination. A bond forged through survival. A relationship that transcended species. But 3 weeks after the rescue, I got a call from a veterinarian in the next county. Buddy had a microchip, and the chip was registered to an elderly man named Frank Chen, who'd reported his dog missing 7 months earlier. 7 months. Buddy had been lost in those mountains for 7 months before Jennifer got hurt. He was surviving on his own, probably had been living wild when he'd found her. He'd stayed with her not out of loyalty to an owner, but out of something else. Instinct, maybe, or loneliness, or some canine understanding that this injured human needed help. Jennifer knew. When I confronted her privately, she admitted she'd realized Buddy wasn't a stray within the first day. She'd seen his collar tan line, the way he responded to commands, signs of training and domestication. But she was hurt and scared and desperately grateful for the company. So she didn't correct the rescue team when they assumed Buddy was hers. Didn't mention it to the media. Let the story grow into something it wasn't. "Would you have searched as hard if you thought I was alone?" she asked me, and I had no answer. Because maybe she was right. Maybe a woman with her loyal dog was a better story than a woman who got lucky when a lost animal happened to find her. We returned Buddy to Frank Chen. The old man cried when he saw his dog, and Buddy went crazy with recognition and joy. That reunion should have been the real story, the miracle of finding each other after 7 months. But it never made the news. Jennifer's lawyer had included confidentiality clauses in all her media contracts. The truth would have complicated the narrative people had bought into. The last time I saw Jennifer was at a book signing. Her memoir had just been released. Survival and Loyalty: How My Dog Saved My Life. I watched her sign copies, smile for photos with Buddy, who she'd actually adopted after Frank Chen, in poor health and unable to care for an active dog, reluctantly agreed to let him go. She saw me in the crowd, and her smile faltered. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she signed a book and handed it to me. Inside she'd written, "Some stories need to be bigger than the truth. Thank you for understanding." But I don't understand. Not really. Because we teach people that rescue stories have heroes, and clear narratives and simple truths. We don't prepare them for the complicated reality, that sometimes survival is random chance, that loyalty can be misattributed, that the stories that captivate the public are often the ones that smooth over the messy truth. Jennifer's story is still told as inspiration. But the real story, about a lost dog and a random encounter, and the narrative we built around it, that story stays hidden. And maybe Jennifer's right. Maybe some stories need their mythology more than their truth. I just wonder what Frank Chen thinks when he sees Buddy's face on book covers, labeled as the dog who saved Jennifer Hayes, when really Buddy was just trying to find his way home.